We've had the preview build and the network test, but with retail code in hand today, we have a complete picture of how Dark Souls Remastered runs on console. No barriers, at last every corner of Lordran is accessible, and while the notorious Blighttown is the first port of call for performance testing, it turns out there are much better ways to push the engine. In the run up to release, I called the remaster's ability to run at 60 frames per second its biggest upgrade over the original game. It remains the case, but between PS4, Xbox One and the Pro and X enhanced variants, is it really a locked 60 FPS for all? Okay, let's backtrack a bit. There are 4 versions to test today, but in essence the rendering setup is only split 2 ways. Just like the network test, Dark Souls Remastered runs at 1920 by 1080 on the regular PS4 and Xbox One models, maximizing that 1080p output from each machine. Meanwhile, the enhanced consoles boast a higher pixel count to support 4K TVs, with PS4 Pro running at a native 3200 by 1800 and Xbox One X also matching that 1800p. For perspective, that's a 2.7 times increase over both regular machines, which for me is enough to get a great picture out of an Ultra HD TV despite that upscale. And of course, most of the HUD and text elements are a true 4K too, which does help with the presentation. Now, on the surface, it's frustrating Xbox One X gets the same resolution as PS4 Pro. It's 4.2 teraflops on Pro versus 6 on X, meaning there is a power differential not being catered for at all. Potentially, a push to a proper 4K would be in step with that leap in power, as we've seen in games like Resident Evil 7, but 1800p is where it's fixed for now. In theory, a dynamic resolution could have been a much better fit here, optimizing the resolution of each frame based on whether 60 FPS is sustainable. For less taxing scenes, it would have meant a true 4K image. As it stands though, there is a performance overhead on both machines, especially X, that isn't tapped into at points. Resolution aside, Dark Souls Remastered ticks a few key boxes in visual upgrades, though there is a sense it could have been pushed much further. On every format, you have a 7.5GB install, roughly double the size of the last gen original, where the upgrade effort from developer QLock embellishes From Software's work from 2011. You get revised lighting, higher res alpha effects, animated grass textures, plus a new doorway fog effect closer in design to Dark Souls 3's. Otherwise, it's often the same as before. Textures are typically a pixel match for the original 360 and PS3 release. Exceptions are there though. Changes to materials, for example, like the knight's armor plating at the start and the giant doors of the Undead Asylum. Anisotropic filtering quality also gets a satisfying boost, but it's fair to say the change in core assets isn't consistent across the breadth of Lordran. With that said, the new lighting model makes for a big departure from the look of the original. As a fan of the game on Xbox 360, I did at points prefer the brighter, more specular appearance to textures in the 2011 release. Despite using the same assets across the Undead Burg, stonework somehow looks sharper in the older rendition of the game here. With that said, the remaster does add a more logical lighting model. Bonfires and bright fog doorways now cast their own light across the environment, which just wasn't the case in 2011. It is a technical upgrade, but for purists, there's no question the aesthetics have changed and it takes getting used to. As for the rest, technically, this is a well-rounded conversion on all formats. At its core, you get the same visual makeup regardless of platform, whether that's the base PS4 or Xbox One, or the enhanced machines. The main distinguishing point then is one set of consoles run at 1080p and the others at 1800p, though there are small differences worth pointing out. For a start, the X and Pro models run with tweaked parameters for bloom and depth of field to match their resolution increase. Taking the base Xbox One vs X as an example, for bloom especially, it means less light bleeding around edges of geometry. In matching clips between a base Xbox One and the X, the two extremes of the power spectrum this generation, it's otherwise a match. Ambient occlusion, texture quality and the method of lighting are replicated exactly on both. However, it's curious to note some obvious omissions on the enhanced consoles. Just as with the network test, PS4 Pro and Xbox One X are missing effects that render properly on the standard consoles. A good case in point is the lens flare effect to the top right of the screen when first meeting the Red Wyvern. It's a post effect that flashes across the screen on Xbox One but never appears on X, and it's a similar story between PS4 and Pro. In both cases, the more powerful hardware cuts the effect. It's not a one-off either. The boss battle with Sif makes moonlight a major visual feature, and yet looking up, X and Pro are missing the moon itself, where both base machines render it fully. It's a glitch that stands as of patch 1.1, and hopefully it can be fixed. Besides this, Dark Souls is visually complete between all four, and none of these machines really miss out. Inevitably then, the question of performance follows. Given the visual ambition of the remaster is so straightforward, presenting a last-gen game with new effects at a higher resolution, you'd hope frame rates would hold at 60fps regardless of what you're running on. And certainly ahead of this analysis, testing Blighttown on PS4 and Pro was encouraging, showing the most demanding area hitting a locked 60fps all the way down. Impressive stuff. But Blighttown is misleading as a stress test in the remaster. For modern consoles, it's no longer about CPU-intensive areas being a bottleneck. Q-Lock's optimization for multi-threaded performance, as shown in Alex's recent PC analysis, is much improved over the vanilla edition. Here's Xbox One in isolation as an example then. As the weakest of the quartet of consoles, it still handles that climb down to the bottom at 60fps with no trouble whatsoever. A massive surprise. So it goes for all formats, but putting the four side by side, there's an angle on Blighttown that does splinter the pack. Turning at the far corner of the area, it's here that a base Xbox One's limits are revealed, dropping to the 50fps mark with tearing to the top of the screen. By comparison, it's just a single frame blip on the regular PS4, and a straight 60fps across the board on Pro and X machines. It would make sense to see screen tear on Xbox One X too, but the fact is I've yet to see any drop whatsoever on that version to prove it. The good news then, the majority of regular play runs flawlessly at 60fps on every console version. And even the new Londo Ruins, which I had pegged for being a solid stress test, runs well even on Xbox One. The catch is that boss battles add an extra level of strain to the engine, and it's there that a pecking order forms across all formats. For this, the boss battle against the Great Wolf Sif is the new framerate benchmark in Dark Souls Remastered, and shows every console at its worst. Combining 5 layers of transparent textures to form a shell, any close-up shot of Sif's fur coating hammers performance on most machines. It's telling of where the four stand too. You get 27fps at worst on Xbox One in that opening cutscene, moving down to 30fps on PS4 and 44 on Pro, while the Xbox One X can't be pushed to a single drop. This makes the battle a chore on the base machines, where in gameplay it doesn't get much better. The regular Xbox One wavers from 30 to 60fps all the way through with heavy tearing. It's bad enough that it could do with a 30fps cap, and likewise for a regular PS4, which, while not as bad, drops often enough to 40fps to distract. Thankfully, the other bosses I've encountered, including the Taurus Demon, Hydra and even the Red Wyvern on the bridge, don't give Xbox One quite as much grief. Here's Xbox One running solo again, and for the most part it's the same cause and effect. Alpha effects buckle that performance line down to around 50fps. So if we're excluding Sif, it's entirely playable all the way through, but again it's the close-ups of the Taurus Demon's fur that stick out like a sore thumb. A regular PS4 by comparison smooths out some of those rough edges with less invasive drops, and it's a step up again on PS4 Pro. The clear conclusion is that Xbox One X is the best, smoothest way to play on console overall. By blunt use of a fixed 1800p resolution, X's GPU overhead is high enough to run every one of these tests without issue. For boss battles, and for Sif in particular, it's a real shame a standard Xbox One falls so far behind though. These are hard as nails encounters that take a lot of trial and error, and to have controller response jump so erratically adds a needless extra challenge. It begs the question though, if 60fps is the preference for the Dark Souls experience, why isn't the Xbox One fixed at a lower 900p? A dynamic resolution would be even better, but with drops as aggressive as these, sacrificing its native 1080p would make a world of difference. If we take Xbox One and Xbox One X as the extremes in performance, the PS4 and Pro sit in between with a passable 60fps delivery. Sony's machines do struggle in exactly the same areas, especially the base console, but if you're jumping in with that platform, it's really only in select instances it's going to be an issue. And fortunately for pro users, the push to 1800p is actually paired with further improved performance, even if it does fall short of X. As a package, there's more to Dark Souls than just visual tweaks, high frame rates and resolution bumps. The move to 6-player online co-op is a major shake-up for invested fans, and there's myriad quality of life improvements and small bug fixes surrounding the project too. For most though, it will be that move to 60fps that justifies returning to Lord around 7 years on. The execution is practically perfect on Xbox One X, and where home consoles are concerned, it's the definitive release. For my money, Dark Souls Remastered undoubtedly could have been more, in reworking more of its textures, adding an optional Scholar of the First Sin style alternative layout for enemies, or even new and expanded areas. Instead, this release commits to faithfully bringing an older game to a new generation, letting it free from the shackles of dated PS3 and 360 hardware, and a poorly optimised PC code. For that alone, the remaster is worth the price of entry. The only question left then is how Dark Souls translates to Nintendo Switch, a delayed portable take on the game I can't wait to see in action. Anyway, that's all from me today. If you did find this useful in any way, do give us a like or subscribe to support our channel. From there, with a click of this button, you can get notifications the moment any new video lands. Also, I've uploaded this video's original 4K source file to our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, a pristine version of this analysis. And if you'd like to get in touch with me or the team, feel free to drop a line on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.